In 2004, a family camping in a remote section near Algonquin Park in Ontario, Canada, had an unsettling encounter that they would never forget. The park, known for its dense forests and tranquil lakes, attracts campers, hikers, and outdoor enthusiasts seeking a peaceful getaway in the heart of nature. It was a crisp autumn evening when the family, consisting of a father, mother, and 2 children, set up their camp near one of the park's hidden backwoods trails. They had chosen this remote area to avoid the busier parts of the park, hoping for solitude. They spent the day exploring the forest, fishing at a nearby lake, and enjoying the usual charm of the great outdoors. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire, the flames casting long shadows on the surrounding trees. The night was eerily quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. But then, a strange figure emerged from the forest. At first, the family assumed it was another camper or a park ranger, but the man's appearance quickly raised their suspicions. He was gaunt and unkempt, his clothes were dirty, and his face was covered in a scruffy beard. His eyes were wide and wild, giving him the look of someone lost or isolated for a long time. He seemed to have appeared from nowhere, as though he had come out of the trees. He didn't speak a word as he approached the camp, standing a few feet away from the family, watching them silently. The father, concerned for the stranger's well-being, stood up and greeted him with an offer of help. Perhaps the man was lost, hungry, or in need of assistance. But when the family extended a friendly hand, the man only stared back with an unsettling, blank expression. He refused to speak and didn't acknowledge their presence in any way. The silence between them grew heavier, and the family began to feel uncomfortable. The mother, now visibly anxious, suggested that the man sit by the fire, where they could offer him some food or water. Still, the strange man said nothing. His only movement was to slowly turn and walk back into the dark woods, disappearing without a trace as swiftly as he had arrived. The family sat in stunned silence for a few moments, unsure of what to make of the bizarre encounter. They tried to shake off the eerie feeling that lingered in the air, convincing themselves that perhaps the man was just a harmless, eccentric wanderer. After all, Algonquin Park is vast, and it's not uncommon to encounter people living in seclusion or who may have ventured too deep into the wilderness. But as the family packed up their belongings the next morning, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They decided to leave the campsite early and head toward the park's entrance. Little did they know, the unsettling experience was far from over. A few weeks later, the family saw a news story that made their blood run cold. Local authorities had discovered a body in the woods near Algonquin Park, matching the exact description of the strange man they had encountered. He was identified as a transient who had reportedly been living in the woods for several years. Authorities believed he had died from exposure to the elements, or possibly due to some other unknown cause. The family was shocked and disturbed to learn that the man they had encountered might have been a ghost or a manifestation of something far darker. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that the man's behavior had been strange in ways they hadn't fully processed at the time. His appearance, silent demeanor, and mysterious disappearance felt off. It was almost as if he had been a spirit trapped in the woods, lost to time, and in some strange way, his encounter with the family was his last act before vanishing forever. Rumors began to spread in the local community about similar encounters. Some hikers reported seeing a gaunt figure lurking near the park's trails. Others spoke of hearing footsteps or seeing shadows where there should have been none. The legend of the strange man in the woods became one of those eerie, unsolved mysteries that added to the mystique of Algonquin Park. The family never returned to the area where they had camped, and the memory of that night would forever haunt them. They often wondered if they had met the ghost of a man who had lived too long in the wilderness, too long to remain part of the world of the living. They had offered him help, but he had refused it, as though trapped in some liminal space between life and death, too far gone to ever truly be saved. To this day, the identity of the strange man remains a mystery. Some say he was a hermit who had lost his sanity and wandered the woods until he died. Others believe he was a lost soul, forever haunting the forests of Algonquin Park, waiting for someone else to witness his tragic existence. Either way, the chilling encounter serves as a reminder of how the wilderness can hold secrets, some of which are better left undisturbed. Big Bend National Park, located in the remote southwestern corner of Texas, is known for its vast, rugged desert landscapes, towering mountains, and breathtaking views. It draws adventure seekers and nature enthusiasts who come to hike its rugged trails and explore its diverse ecosystems. In 2009, there was a group of 4 friends who decided to camp in the park for a long weekend. They had spent the day hiking through the park's rugged terrain, soaking in the beauty of the desert, and preparing for a relaxing evening around the campfire. The campsite was remote, far from the more populated areas of the park, ensuring solitude and peace for the group. They set up their tents, unpacked their gear, and settled in for the night as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a blanket of stars above them. However, the quiet evening didn't last long. Around midnight, one of the campers, Sarah, stepped away from the campfire to use the restroom when she noticed something disturbing on the ground near the edge of the campsite. At first, she thought it was simply a trick of the light, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw something much more unsettling. Fresh, bloody footprints were leading away from the campsite and into the darkness of the wilderness. The footprints were large, but Sarah couldn't tell what had made them. They didn't appear from any animal the group was familiar with. No claw marks or paw prints were discernible. The blood looked fresh, and the prints seemed to be coming from deep within the forest. Sarah rationalized that it must have been some wild animal. After all, Big Bend was home to many creatures, from coyotes to mountain lions. She immediately went back to the campsite and alerted her friends. They were understandably alarmed, but they decided to investigate further. Armed with flashlights, they followed the trail of bloody footprints, which led them deeper into the wilderness. As they ventured further, the prints became more erratic. At times, they seemed to curve in strange directions, as if something, or someone, had been moving wildly through the underbrush. Despite their growing fear, they kept going, believing they could uncover the source of the strange marks. The trail continued for what felt like hours, twisting and turning through the desert landscape. The bloody footprints led them to a cliffside, where the marks abruptly stopped as if the person, or creature, had vanished. There was no sign of what had happened next. The blood appeared to have simply disappeared into the night. The group was exhausted and terrified, but they had no choice but to return to their campsite, where they could regroup and try to make sense of what they had witnessed. The following day, the group was still on edge. They hadn't slept much after their discovery, and were discussing leaving the park early when they noticed something even more unsettling. One of the campers, Mike, was missing. At first, the others assumed he had gone for an early morning walk or hike, but as the hours passed and there was no sign of him, their concern deepened. They called out for him, searched the campsite, and checked the nearby areas where they had previously hiked. After hours of searching, they finally found Mike unconscious and disoriented about a mile from the campsite, lying in the sand with no clear explanation for his condition. He was covered in abrasions, his clothes torn in several places, and he was covered in dirt and dust, as if he had been dragged through the desert. The most shocking detail was the blood. Though Mike had no visible injuries, there was a considerable amount of blood smeared across his face and body. Despite the wounds, he was still alive, but in a confused and semi-conscious state. The group managed to get Mike back to camp, but he was unable to provide any clear explanation of what had happened to him. He claimed to have no memory of the events that led up to his unconsciousness. His injuries were unexplained, and no one could figure out where the blood had come from. They immediately contacted park authorities, and a search and rescue team was dispatched to investigate the area. The authorities found no signs of any other campers or anyone who might have been involved in Mike's injury. The trail of bloody footprints, too, remained a mystery. There were no further signs of violence, and no explanation was ever given for what had happened. The park's officials were baffled by the whole ordeal, unable to explain how Mike had ended up injured and unconscious with no recollection of the events. The blood that had been found in the wilderness, too, remained unexplained. To this day, the source of the blood and the cause of Mike's injuries are mysteries that have never been solved. Some believe the group stumbled upon the aftermath of something sinister, perhaps a violent animal attack or a strange encounter with another camper. Others speculate that the blood may have been left by something far more unsettling, something the group was never meant to encounter. Whether it was a violent force of nature or something far more supernatural, the bloody footprints of Big Bend remain one of the park's eerie, unsolved mysteries. The campers, still shaken by the experience, left the park as soon as they could, leaving behind questions that have never been answered. In 1971, a group of young friends set out to experience the serenity of nature in this vast wilderness. They were excited about their camping trip, eager to escape the hustle of their daily lives and enjoy the freedom that the mountains offered. Among them was a young woman named Doreen, who was adventurous and independent. Her love for exploring the outdoors made her the perfect companion for the trip, but her enthusiasm would eventually lead her into an encounter that would remain a chilling mystery. The group had set up camp near a remote area of the Sierra Nevada, far from any developed trailheads or campgrounds. On the first day, they hiked to a nearby peak, marveling at the breathtaking views of the surrounding valleys. They spent the evening sitting around the campfire, enjoying each other's company and sharing stories under the stars. It seemed like the perfect escape, and they were all eager to see what the next day would bring. However, by the second day of their trip, things began to take a strange turn. Doreen, known for her adventurous spirit, expressed interest in exploring the area on her own. The others were comfortable at the campsite, and while they were initially hesitant, they agreed to let her go off by herself, as they all trusted her ability to navigate the wilderness. With a smile and a wave, Doreen ventured into the woods, planning to return in a couple of hours to continue the group's activities. But hours passed, and Doreen did not return. At first, her friends assumed that she had simply gotten caught up in her exploration, maybe distracted by the beauty of the mountains, or perhaps wandering further than she had anticipated. But as the afternoon turned into evening, and there was still no sign of her, concern began to grow. They called out her name, but the only answer was the wind rustling through the trees. With each passing hour, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Something didn't feel right. By nightfall, her friends had become frantic. They decided to search the nearby woods, calling for her in all directions. They scoured the trails, checking along the edges of the dense forest where Doreen might have wandered. But there was no trace of her. No footprints, no sounds of her calling back. Nothing. Her disappearance made no sense. She wasn't the type to get lost, and she had the experience to know her way around the wilderness. Her absence felt unnatural, as though she had simply vanished into thin air. The next day, the group contacted park rangers and authorities, who quickly organized a search and rescue mission. The area was combed over by experienced searchers, dogs were brought in to track her scent, and helicopters scoured the sky above. Despite the large-scale search efforts, Doreen's whereabouts remained a mystery. No one could explain where she had gone, or why she had vanished without a trace. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. Then, in a shocking twist, a campsite was discovered. It was Doreen's tent, still standing and fully intact, as if she had simply stepped away and forgotten to take it down. Everything was in its place. Her belongings, her sleeping bag, her pack. Nothing appeared disturbed. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence that she had been attacked or harmed. It was as though she had just disappeared, leaving everything behind. The search continued for several weeks, but no trace of Doreen was ever found. Her disappearance remained baffling. There were no clues to suggest that she had been kidnapped or encountered foul play. No animals had left any signs of their presence near the campsite, and no evidence of an accident was found. The most unnerving detail was the absence of any footprints leading away from the tent. It was as if she had simply walked into the woods and vanished into the unknown. Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain Doreen's disappearance, but none of them have been proven. Some speculate that she might have encountered someone, perhaps a stranger in the woods, who had something sinister planned. Given the remoteness of the area, it's possible that a chance encounter led to a violent confrontation. Others wonder if she could have been lost in the wilderness, disoriented and unable to find her way back to camp. But then, how could she have left no trace at all? The idea of a person disappearing without a trace, with no explanation or clues left behind, has fueled speculation about the possibility of something beyond the ordinary. Perhaps a paranormal presence, or even a cryptid lurking in the wilderness. To this day, the mystery of Doreen's disappearance remains unsolved. Despite the exhaustive searches and the numerous theories that have emerged, no one can explain what happened to her. Her family, friends, and the authorities have all struggled to find closure, and the case has become one of the Sierra Nevada's most enduring mysteries. The only thing that remains is her tent, the empty campsite, and the haunting thought that Doreen's disappearance is just another unsolved enigma of the wild. Her disappearance is a tragic tale, one that haunts those who hear it. leaving them to wonder whether Doreen's fate was simply the result of an accident, or whether she encountered something much more sinister in the heart of the wilderness.